On December 11, 2016, Eric Garland tweeted, "Thread. I'm now hearing this meme that says Obama, Clinton, et al. Are doing nothing. Just gave up. Guys, it's time for some game theory." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. If you forced yourself to forget that this Twitter thread existed, I don't blame you. Like so much of the early hashtag resistance to Trump's first term, it is deeply embarrassing in hindsight. Now, many people found it embarrassing at the time, but I think everyone finds it embarrassing now. But what is this thread, and why didn't I read all of it in the intro? Put simply, I didn't read all of it in the intro because it is 127 tweets long. I tried to make the show entertaining for people who are not on Twitter at the time that these things were tweeted, but this one's gonna be kind of impossible. Because this 127 tweet thread really took over Twitter for like 8 hours. And what is the thread? Is it game theory? To start off, a lot of people smarter than me read the whole thread and said that there's no game theory in it at all. But what is it? Basically, Eric took 127 tweets to schizophrenically talk about how everything leading up to Donald Trump's election was the result of Russian interference. And I know what you're probably saying, that the Russians did absolutely interfere to help Trump get elected, and that is true. I think that people on the left have generally wanted to downplay the obvious fact that Russia helped Trump get elected, but that's not what Garland is positing. He says that basically everything from the beginning of Fox News to right-wing radio to WikiLeaks is all Russian interference. And it is insane. Here are some brief highlights. The second tweet in the thread is, "Actor analysis. The Russians enter the game with a broad objective, flexible tactics, and several acceptable outcomes." It's worth noting that this is the only actor analysis he does. If he was actually doing game theory, he would do actor analyses of everyone involved. In his article, The Rise of the Alt-Center, Sam Criss defines game theory as this: a branch of mathematics that uses computational models to predict the behavior of human beings in potentially conflictual situations. It's complex, involves a lot of formal logic and algebra, and is mostly useless. Game theory models human actions on the presumption that everyone is constantly trying to maximize the potential gain against everyone around them. If he was doing game theory, he would analyze Russia's position, the United States' position, all of the politicians involved's positions. But instead, he says things like, "Plus, the Russians fucking rule at covert. Always have. Ask a cold warrior. Mucho respect for our adversaries. They do clever work." Later on, he says, "From this position launches an initiative from an old hand at the KGB, now solidified in influence. Subvert for the throat. Go big. Go hard." Later, "Let's skip ahead to WikiLeaks. Brilliant. Ingratiate the left into this anti-establishment distrust of Western intel." After he hallucinates some stuff and says some mean things about Glenn Greenwald, he says, "Then, OMG, that worked so well that the piece de resistance was next. Snowden. Booyah. The big game. NSA. Prism. Spasm." After moving on to talking about Fox News in the 80s, and Rush Limbaugh, he says, "See, because Nixon got impeached, that meant the media was in on it. WAPO, NYT, traitors. We look bad, and the media hate begins." After making no sense for 30 more tweets, he says, "Katrina. Bush, looking out the window, confused. Hey, but in intel news, the National Geospatial Intel Agency helps critically." Later, he says, 2008, "The housing Ponzi we used to get out of the dot-com bust 9/11 era recession has now gone pear-shaped. Utterly nuclear." How does he connect this stuff to Russian interference? He doesn't. Then, when he eventually gets to Barack Obama getting elected, he says, "They start the Tea Party. Yo, remember Boston? Patriots, something something. Tea Party, nothing matters, take it all back. Yah!" Then eventually, and I can't remember how he gets to this, "Only the government knew the Archangel Gabriel was sending him to find the next Jesus. So cut it out. CIA, stop it. Giant conspiracy." And as he's wrapping up, he goes, "And now it's December 11th. Trump says he don't need no stinking intel agencies. Russia, blah ha 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 ha, blames Ukraine. Lol 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 lols." And eventually he wraps up by just saying, "Thread." Does he really reach a conclusion? Keeping in mind that the thing he said he was going to do was explain why Obama, Clinton, et al. Were not doing anything. But then instead of explaining that, he just goes on and on for 100 tweets about how somehow Russia was behind everything that's ever happened in America since like 1980. And he does it in the most obnoxious 2007 era internet slang. And I think he kind of is like waving at the idea that like they're not going to do anything because like they can't and they shouldn't. I don't know, man. I really tried hard to understand that part of it. And I'm sure you're wondering at this point, who the hell is Eric Garland? I have an answer to that question, but it's not really helpful at all. Business Insider notes that he's a self-described DC technocrat based in St. Louis who runs a small consulting firm called Competitive Futures. At least that's what he did back then. I think he's still full-time being a resistance grifter now. He apparently says that he predicted the 2008 housing bubble, but if that was true, why didn't Christian Bale play him in a movie? So he is a classic resistance grifter. A resistance grifter, if you weren't on Twitter at the time, was someone who took advantage of Trump's election to sell conspiracies to people who wanted to believe that his impeachment was just around the corner. They talk about Russian influence, they talk about backroom deals, they talk about ways that Mueller was going to take him down, and of course they all were completely wrong. It was all grift. They were selling t-shirts, they were selling access to Patreons, they were selling all this nonsense. And Eric Garland is one of the biggest. Now, when I said that this thread really took over Twitter for 8 hours, I meant it. If this thread was not popular, it would not be worth covering on the show. Lots and lots of people have tweeted rambling 127 tweet threads about the state of politics, but not all of them got massive plaudits from important people in the media. Investigative journalist David Farenthold said, "Damn man, this is great writing, using a form that doesn't usually lend itself to greatness." Sam Chris's article has other examples of people praising it, most of these have been deleted. Editor-in-chief of Mother, Jones Clara Jeffrey, called it the single greatest thread I've ever read on Twitter, and in its way a Federalist paper for 2016. Andrew Cuomo's director of communications said, if there were a Pulitzer for tweeting, this thread would be the undisputed winner of 2016. Patton Oswalt called it succinct and propulsive writing. I definitely remember one of the Pod Save America guys said that he stood up and applauded at the end of it, but I can't find that tweet. And the thing is, and I really can't believe I'm going to admit this, I didn't really hate this thread when I first read it. I think it took me like a couple of days to realize how awful it was, and I'm embarrassed to say that, but I don't think that I should ever lie on the show. And I think that me admitting this is somewhat useful, because I think the reason why people love this so much is because we were really so unmoored after Trump's election. I know there are people who are watching who are like 18 or 19 who are not at all adults when Trump first got elected, so you might not realize this, but it was considered like an impossibility that he would win. Like on election night, I got for dinner a Baconator combo with a large Dr. Pepper because I wanted to have something indulgent to celebrate him losing. And if you're thinking to yourself, Jake, that must have made your stomach extra upset as you were going through the tribulations of watching him win all the swing states, you're absolutely correct. It's quite possibly the worst dinner decision I've ever made in my life. And so I think what this Eric Garland thread did, and what the resistance grifters did generally, is gave people hope that this all wasn't real, that there were greater forces at play. Because in a way, even though it is scary to imagine this all being KGB interference, that actually is a lot more comforting than believing that your country actually just did this. People wanted to believe that there was a grand investigation around the corner that would make Trump resign or get impeached. And that allowed grifters like Garland to step in and sell people exactly what they wanted to buy. And I will say, I think is a much more positive development in the reaction to Trump 2 than Trump 1, is that I've noticed a lot less success among these people this time around. Obviously, there's still people who are going to be susceptible to a grift, but I feel like a lot of the people who fell for resistance grifters the first time are not doing it the second time. I think there's a general acknowledgement that there is not going to be a grand conspiracy that takes this all down. And as for Garland, like I said, he really cashed in on this. He's done different Game Theory threads over the years, one in 2018, and right after Trump's second election, he tweeted, "I wrote the Game Theory thread because everyone missed what really happened and they were panicking. You guys ready to listen again?" Now, the thing that's implied with this tweet is that he was right about the original Game Theory thread. And like, no, he wasn't. He was just a little bit drunk and ad-libbing some thoughts. That's not me speculating, he admitted to that. I do this episode mostly with a positive attitude, because like I said, I think we have grown beyond the need for Eric Garlands. We never needed them to succeed in politics, but I think a lot of people needed them to self-soothe. But I think most people realize that we are past the point of self-soothing being a reasonable thing to do. But the real indelible mark that this thread left on the world is the phrase, "time for some game theory." It's often used ironically, like yesterday Schnorkels O'Borg posted to Blue Sky, "Why is Hegseth texting his wife top secret war plans? Let's do some game theory, 1 out of 347. In 2017, Wild Geetress posted, "Seeing a lot of confusion about what's happening in Iran. As a Norwegian expert who roughly knows where Iran is on the map and has read a lot of tweets about this situation, let me tell you what's really going on. It's time for some game theory." Thread, 1 of 138. Even the official account for Comedy Central got into it, saying, "A horse walks into a bar, but why? It's time for some game theory." It really just became a great way to mock people who are talking in highfalutin ways about stuff they don't understand at all. Because that's the important thing. Eric Garland did not understand any of this. Garland himself is often mocked with the phrase. Ugo Rels posted a screenshot of Eric Garland's custody battle with "time for some game theory." And when Trump won a second time, Pinstripe Bungle posted, "Guys, it's time for some game theory now." But one of the funny ways where Garland's phrase comes up is when game theory is actually called for. In 2018, when Michael Cohen was testifying about all the dirt he had on Trump and Russia, Nate Cohn quote tweeted a story about it and said, "I am pleased to announce that it is actually time for some game theory." Because yes, in that context, game theory does apply to trying to guess what Michael Cohen's actions will be. And it's come up a lot in the past few weeks because tariffs and retaliatory tariffs are also a situation where game theory is useful. Skanda Amarnath said, "Guys, it's time for some game theory," when breaking down the Mexico and Canada tariffs. And on Blue Sky, Kept Simple said, "A really common right-wing take now is, if tariffs are so bad, why are other countries responding with tariffs of their own? For once in our lives, it is actually time for some game theory." It is just very funny to me that this actual mathematical concept is kind of inextricably linked to this dumb Twitter thread. If you were on Twitter in December 2016 and you don't work in like advanced mathematics, if you read the phrase game theory, the first thing you're going to think is Eric Garland's thread or Bomani Jones's canceled HBO show. I often like to end episodes by saying the lesson here is yada yada yada, but like I said, I think people have basically learned the lesson. If someone is doing a Twitter thread that is the equivalent of the meme of Charlie and It's Always Sunny with the cork board, they shouldn't be listened to. And if you do make the mistake of listening to that person and then they ask for money to hear more of their takes, don't pay. Okay, it's hard to pivot from that to me telling you that you can subscribe to my Patreon, patreon.com/Museum of Twitter if you want to vote when I cover on Subscriber Sundays and get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter, but I swear I'm not a grifter.